Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. And it's a truly a wonderful time to get together and really discuss technology and really discuss all everything that's actually happening with the industry. But one of the biggest drivers of industry right now is really smart cities and the application that runs on smart cities. This is the buzzword that a buzzword that a lot of people are actually talking about. But we know very well that there's always key components, or there's always things that we need to consider to actually make sure that the smart cities actually work. And so today we actually have in our panel a group that has over 100 years, I guess, of industry experience. And of course, we have Keith Pennachio, who's the Chief Strategy Officer and Executive Vice President for SQUAN. And we also have Walter Cannon, who is the Vice President of Business Development for ZenFi. And of course, Alex Gamota, who's the Senior Vice President and General Manager for BIGBELLY. I'm Noel Garcia. I'm actually the Vice President of Operations in Advantage Engineers for the East Coast. Okay, without further ado, I think we need to dive in and ask really the first question, and that is, truly, we say that space, connectivity, and power are the key ingredients of a smart city deployment. Why is that? Alex, maybe we can start with you and say, okay, what is one of the key ingredients, and why is it a key ingredient?
Sure. And first off, I want to thank Alyssa, Patty, and the other folks at NEDAS for putting this on and inviting me. And it's an exciting topic near and dear to my heart. I've been in the industry a little over 20 years. So I guess Walter and Keith, you make up the balance there to get to over 100. We're all old, but maybe some are more than others. Anyhow, exciting topic. And so I think if you step back and you think about smart city and you think about all the great applications that are out there, and community leaders, business leaders, they always think about the apps. Well, all those great apps, or the majority of them, actually need equipment that's nearby that enables them to run effectively. If you think about, Waze or Uber, these are just two examples of these sort of information communication technology applications that rely on having equipment that's nearby. So if you need equipment that's nearby, and as you think about, 4G into 5G, particularly millimeter wave, as well as even unlicensed spectrum, you realize that you need a place to put this equipment. You need an antenna that essentially is never going to leave. And that antenna needs to be connected to a box, and the box is either a processor, a radio, and that box or that piece of equipment needs to have power and most likely needs to have fiber connected to it as well. So space certainly becomes a constraint when you think about the urban environments or public spaces, because the constraining item on it is aesthetics, as well as just physical space. I think, not to have the whole conversation right here, but part of why I transitioned from my last company, large tower company, to BIGBELLY was because I believed, and I think we're seeing it play out, that there's a finite amount of space in the public space, and it's really about being creative and innovative about maybe reusing, adapting, hiding in plain sight with all that equipment.
Yeah, definitely, Alex. That's definitely one of the key components, right? As we all say, there's limited street furnitures, and if you want to get closer to the users, you have to reuse areas where it's already existing. That makes it a lot easier. But nevertheless, space will always be a critical component to that. Now, aside from that, connectivity is another one. And Walter, I know from ZenFi Networks, you guys build a lot of fiber. So what does connectivity mean in terms of it being a critical component to smart cities?
No, thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think here at ZenFi Networks, we actually deliver solutions that encompass both space, power, and connectivity. I think the most important point is that if we had not built the solutions that we built and continue to build solutions and continue to work with governments and municipalities to have more siting areas, whether it be smart street furniture like BIGBELLY or poles or smart poles, that's really important in being able to deliver solutions. Just think about where we would be as a nation if we had not built the infrastructure we built prior to the pandemic. And from a connectivity perspective, there's always a challenge. And the biggest challenge is being able to get to those other items, whether it be the space for siting, from a siting or delivering the power, and then having the right amount of fiber. And then last but not least, and probably the most important, is being able to know where your fiber is and where it's going. So, in some instances, and what we've built in our networks across the New York, New Jersey area, we built over 1,300 route miles of fiber, very integral, not complicated, but accessible, adaptable cable conduit system that allows us to interrupt our cables wherever we need to be, surpassing any manhole. So it's really important to be able to be accessible and be able to deliver solutions that can help provide the people that build solutions on top of us. Because remember, we're just providing the infrastructure. We're like sort of the bottom of the Lego blocks. We're providing the Lego blocks at the bottom, a very foundation that people can build. Some of those being all the major carriers, enterprise, wholesale telecom providers, WISP, whoever they may be.
Okay, great, Walter. And truly, all of this equipment needs to have connectivity, right? It definitely needs space, but definitely needs connectivity. And you brought up a good point that there is some challenges to it, and we'll talk to that in a little bit later. But aside from space and connectivity, of course, there's always going to be power that is required. And Keith, if you don't mind, can you expound a little bit more on why power?
Sure. So picking up on where Walter and Alex left off, as we look to network architecture and the deployment of infrastructure, SQUAN originally started out as a wireless construction firm, right? And we've grown over the years by incorporating other companies that we acquired over time to augment what we're already providing to our customer base. But what we saw early on is that, as we look towards the horizon at smart cities, there's a number of different services that are needed in order to make that a reality. So, underpinning a lot of the discussion here, when we look at, coordination of power on our wireless business, and we started to see pole attachments that manifested in many communities, in some cases on power utility poles, we saw it as an angle that if we were involved in the power business itself, it would help expedite a lot of the activity across our various projects. Now, on the broader scene, when we look at how these designs come about, whether they're developed initially by the municipalities themselves or the network operators, power is critical to all of it, right? And when you start looking at the early developments, and I harken back to my days in Puerto Rico building the Suncom network, where more than half of the network at one point was on generator power, right? Today, there's not that option, especially as you get into dense urban areas where you're really going to need a dedicated power source. There's, of course, battery backup scenarios. There's also remote generators that are maybe not in the line of sight, partnerships with other infrastructure companies that may have gen sets to bridge gaps. but powers, move right to the front of the line, insofar as what is required when you're contemplating deploying these networks. And if it's not contemplated on the front end, you could almost be assured that the demo and rebuild is somewhere not too far away. So yeah, we place a great emphasis on how we look at where power fits into the mold, especially when you start to look at densifying cities and densifying networks, utilizing existing infrastructure. It's complicated but necessary.
Definitely. And again, any equipment that we actually have requires power, right? And the question really is, where is that power coming from? It's the same thing as connectivity. Where is that connectivity coming from? And then going all the way to where the box is, everything needs to come together to actually bring out the site. Mm-hmm. One question though, guys, is we know that we actually need all of those, but what challenges are we actually seeing practically when we're trying to deploy smart cities? Are there larger challenges that comes our way for a better deployment?
No, for sure. No, I'll take the first crack here. And again, I mean, if you think about smart city, but before I pivot to talk about cellular, even the core BIGBELLY product has those two issues, the three issues of space, power, and connectivity. And the way that the folks who worked on the product early on, because it's a 15-year-old company, global presence, was to go the route of solar for the power, and a lot of our IPs around energy management, which then drives the smarts associated with our core smart waste solution, both a compactor, and then we have a SIM card that communicates back to the cloud to allow the city or the facilities department or whoever the property owner is to be able to use this solution, the smart city solution, in this way. Now, that's fine if you're thinking about low power, low data types of smart city solutions, and certainly for smart meters or smart lighting, these kinds of approaches can work well. Once you start getting into, I think, the realm of really what the meat of our conversation is, that's when you start needing to have grid power and fiber. And so given the lack of space or aesthetics, and Keith, similarly, in my background, I did a lot of work with utility poles and streetlight attachments, but at a certain point you run out. And you need to look at things like kiosks or bus shelters, or in the case of BIGBELLY, where we have a presence in over 50 countries, 25,000 unique locations in the US alone with that core product. How can you modify it, adapt it, as Walter was saying, so that you can start actually supporting a lot of other types of uses? So I know that we all agreed that we weren't going to do PowerPoint to death, but there is one slide that I wanted to show because I think it's the natural progression of what we're talking about, which is creating this this multi-network, multi-purpose platform that handles multiple different things. And by doing so, it actually addresses costs with power and costs with connectivity. And again, this would be more grid power and bringing fiber to the location. This is one campus. If you know the BIGBELLY product, that we're on hundreds of campuses, and they love their BIGBELLY smart waste and recycling for all the right reasons. I'll say sustainability, aesthetics, beautification. Now that they have that space being utilized by the smart waste and the recycle, they also know that they need to have some sort of asset to handle the cellular networks they also have their own private networks that they're thinking about. So in this instance here on the left, what you're seeing is a 30-foot tall pole with a canister antenna at the top, 5G millimeter wave beneath that. That's all for the carrier. But then you see a campus CBRS, campus Wi-Fi, campus banners. In this arrangement, power, fiber, there's a business arrangement that works for everyone, and it's cheaper than it's cheaper than if this was a single purpose location. Also, given this location that they have a lot of underground issues, it really is able to spread those costs of the power of the fiber against many different use cases. So, there's almost a spectrum of, okay, how much power, how much data do you need? And maybe some smart city deployments, like our core product, can be fine being off grid. Maybe even it's a millimeter wave repeater. But when you start thinking about all the possibilities and applications that need the cellular network, 4G, 5G, CBRS, Wi-Fi, lights, cameras, all those things, then you really need to be thinking about almost a Swiss Army knife approach. I mean, I liked Walter's Lego bricks, but we feel like is a lot of times we talk to our customers, and our customers are kind of a broad group. It's what else can you put there? How else can we utilize that space most effectively?
Okay, and thanks, Alex, for sharing this, because truly aesthetics is definitely something that's being considered. I know a lot of cities, are very particular on how a lot of the structures look like. So Walter, what other challenges do you actually see? And in fact, we said consolidation of a lot of the technology that goes into a single node or a single site. How much fiber is really needed then to actually go into one of these locations?
So let me try to answer your question and from another perspective, because I think the whole ZenFi Networks as a digital infrastructure provider and trying to enable the creation of smart cities and bring some realistic, bring everything into reality has a lot of different challenges. So that's what I would like to address. When we talk about fiber, I think you're never going to have enough fiber. People are trying to solve the issues of connectivity, thinking that they're going to add, some type of wireless connectivity and others. But if you look at all the different architectures that are becoming prevalent and becoming in use, not just here in America, throughout the Europe and Asia, including stuff. If you're familiar with ORAN, Open RAN, and others, it's apparent that we're going to need a really more access to not just fiber, but siting and power and distributed power. I think what we have now, to be quite frank, in my opinion, is that we have some people are making, government's making a good effort to address the issue by funding. And funding might be, hey, build more fiber, but they're not really seeing the whole picture of what encompasses digital infrastructure, and they don't understand the architecture behind different digital infrastructure. So you run into issues that might be at the municipality with land use. Someone said it earlier that you run out of poles. Well, no, you really don't run out of poles. What you run out of is the ability to put more poles. Because I think if you ask ZenFi Networks, we would love to put up more poles. We would love to put up more siting devices, but it's a land use issue that I have to go wait, through X amount of months to get approved to do this. So that's the problem. Then then the other issue that I think that, and it's a big issue when you're talking about trying to solve one of the biggest problems we have here in America from a technology perspective is closing the digital divide is, think about the days when they first wanted to distribute electricity and what it took to do that. They thought about it and they built these central offices and they distribute out cables. And then in front of a building, they had the cable ready to bring it in to source the building. But if the person that owned the building had not put in the right cabling to support it, then you wouldn't be able to bring in the power and their residents would have been without power. Now imagine relating that to where we are today and the need for digital infrastructure throughout, not just in the streets, and because we can do that today under most of the guidelines and everything that's out there, but think about having to be able to do that in the building and maybe directing funding towards that. So that could be an issue. So if you ask me, my answer to the question would be, and we strive to do this on a daily basis as ZenFi Networks, is building a more cohesive relationship with municipalities and government, that they understand what the true requirements are from different digital infrastructure providers like ZenFi. We all, I believe, are very used to putting our capital to work and building solutions that better the community. There's millions of studies that are out there that show that how this technology has bettered the community, increased the GDP, increased the builds more revenue base inside your municipality. So I think the argument has to be is how we can better continue to build and make that type of relationship better is a lot of the challenges that we have today.
Great, Walter. How about you, Keith? Any opinion on your end?
Yeah, and I'll say the missing word that's out there is collaboration, right? I think we all hinted around the word in varying ways. I look at time past, and Walter and I have been on panels in the past, as I've been on many of my own related to smart cities, and I look at the constant issue that arises is stemmed in miscommunication or lack of consideration for planning across multiple technologies and applications. And I still think there's room out there for somebody, and we move that direction, but there's so many moving parts. The example that Walter gave about having the cable in the right place at the right time, or the example that Alex pointed out where you see the different technologies deployed, those are in a lot of cases in silos, right? And the conversations don't happen unless you've got somebody who's able to communicate across all of those lines, provide options for plug and play, because where you may have a LEC in certain areas, you may have a power company that supports certain areas, you may have gaps in there as well. We've seen other groups come into play through third-party money and invest in some of that infrastructure on their own to bridge those gaps that some individual network operators were unable to do, whether it's due to capital constraints on their own budgets annually, or their lack of willingness to build in a certain area, and that creates opportunities for everybody. But I'll stress, it's collaboration. It's understanding the landscape, understanding where the gaps are in that landscape, and articulating a path that is incorporating of all those items. And I'll use the example that Alex gave earlier about bus stops and shelters. I'm forever amazed at the number of RFPs that get issued by a city for telecom infrastructure or use of telecom infrastructure that does not take into account some of those properties. In a lot of respects, they'll ask for somebody to come in and do a third-party audit of what assets they have, most of which are poorly represented in their own data because of the cycles of the administration, whoever may be in office at that time. But it's, collaboration cannot be underestimated when you're contemplating all of this, and you really need to take into account, not just the technology, but the power and even the downstream execution, because we all hear autonomously driving vehicles like off in the periphery, right? And there's certainly camps on who is leading the charge in do I need a connected network, or how am I connecting that car, right? What are the safety restrictions? Am I using intersection lights, right? Do I have the power to support some of that radio technology I'm deploying? It's forums like this, fortunately, provide a bit of insight into how we think of these types of networks. But again, I'll hang my hat on collaboration all day long, and as I like to say, I talk to everybody on a routine basis, and it's really the only way to shape a path forward that's inclusive.
Thank you for that.
No, if I could jump in.
Sure.
No, if I could just jump in, piggyback on what Keith was saying. He's 100% correct. I mean, we could get into, the idea of smart cities and the reality of whether smart cities are actually going to be a thing, or we're going to call it something else later. But at the end of the day, there's some issues that cost is really a big issue, and it continues to be a big issue, and something that the people that want smart cities should think about. And through collaboration, they could understand what the parameters are around that. But there's other ways to dissuade the cost by having the ability to build more solutions on top of the correct digital infrastructure. So if you look at the correct digital infrastructure of space, power, and connectivity as being the building blocks to deliver the right solutions in smart cities, that's the way to look at it. And I'll end you with just one thing that I think about a lot. If inside of 5G, there's two very big features that's waiting to be utilized and exploited by the major carriers out there, and that would be the ability to deliver network slicing and solutions and ATS3, ATSSS, which is where 5G and Wi-Fi converge, so that if I'm talking on my Wi-Fi call, if I'm a tenant, a tenant doing his homework in the NYCHA projects, and he's doing it on a tablet over Wi-Fi, and he's also can get connected to one of the Lifeline programs from T-Mobile or whoever. So he walks outside of his house, but he's still on his tablet doing his homework. He never drops the call. Imagine that. When these are the type of applications. These are different applications. There's more applications coming that we never ever heard about. Mm-hmm. But imagine if you had the right digital infrastructure to support that. So I would challenge everyone, including ZenFi, to continue to have more collaborative talks with all the constituents involved in this unique economy and this unique world that we live in.
Yeah, and we're running out of time, but let me summarize everything that we've spoken about. So truly, smart cities, the three ingredients is really space, connectivity, and power. But we are all saying that it requires collaboration between the carriers, the municipalities or the jurisdictions, and everyone else involved in the deployment to make sure that there is a successful deployment of smart cities and a massive deployment of smart cities everywhere. So again, thank you so much for the panelists, and thank you.
Yeah, stand by though, because we do have a question from our audience. And this one's for you, Alex, for BIGBELLY. Does BIGBELLY still have agreements with the traditional trash removal companies where it prohibits a town or city, et cetera, to purchase and deploy their BIGBELLY wireless trash can?
I don't believe so. I mean, it's sort of a vague question. I'm not aware that such a thing exists, but if you want to take it offline, I can certainly follow up about it. But
right.
As far as I'm aware, it shouldn't be a prohibit to go forward.
Excellent. Well, thank you for addressing that. And thank you all for such a great conversation.